can always see it.
Exactly.
Mr. Oliver, I take it that you will be addressing the jury on behalf of people of the state.
State of
whatever
Midlands,
it's called in this
yes, Your
jurisdiction.
Honor.
Not the Commonwealth, whatever else it is. Okay. Everybody ready?
I believe so.
Your Honor, just briefly, before my closing argument, I'd like to clarify a previous ruling of yours.
Sure.
The statements that came in on the cross-examination of Officer Keenan, wherein Officer Keenan described going to Avery Bancroft's office on March 31st and asking him in a number of different ways whether or not he was willing to offer a bribe. Those came onto the record, although I know throughout the trial you'll later clarify. Am I free to use those as evidence of a motive for Mr. Bancroft putting the cash in the briefcase aside from her soliciting a bribe?
You are. Those have not been objected to. I didn't strike those statements. It wasn't until later that that issue was raised. And after that point, I continued to sustain those objections. But because those are on the record, they are not stricken. You are free to argue those particular statements to the jury.
Thank you for the clarification, Your Honor.
May I proceed?
Yes, you may.
May it please the court. Closing counsel. At the start of today's trial, the judge asked all 6 attorneys to stand up and introduce ourselves. So I said, "Good afternoon. My name is Deanna Oliver." See, I didn't have to think too hard about it. I didn't have to hesitate. There was nothing else to say because it was the truth. When you have nothing to hide, the truth doesn't change, no matter who asks, when, or why. But that's not the way the truth works for the defendant. When asked in her interrogation exactly what happened, she says, "I have nothing to hide." But then they ask about that bank deposit. She doesn't say, "I won this at a publicity event, I'm a gambler," whatever else she tried to tell you. She says, "Size is in the eye of the beholder." When asked about this briefcase that she had on April 16th, she didn't say, "Well, I always have this. It's a standard part of my business meetings." She ends the interrogation. Members of the jury, the truth is easy to be told unless you're the defendant. Because she knows she accepted a bribe. That's why, as the state today, we're charging her with bribery. Now, we couldn't just come in here and say it. We had to bring you proof. We had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Chase Covington accepted something of value or benefit and that she did so with the intent that it would influence her vote in favor of Avery Bancroft. Now, we met our burden today, but it's up to you to decide whether or not we did. So you have to ask yourselves whether or not we did, and in order to make that determination, all you have to do is follow the money. Follow the money from Bancroft to the briefcase to the bank. Now, this case has a lot of names, meetings, people, so I want to break it down for you. It's all pretty simple. It starts with the defendant. Now, today you learned that she doesn't make that much money, but what she does have is debt. $134,000 worth. And while she may not make that much money, what she does have is power. She is chair of the Midlands Gambling Commission. So when Avery Bancroft called wanting to grease the wheels on a new proposal, she saw an opportunity. An opportunity to get out her debt. Now, you heard from Officer Keenan on the stand that at first Chase Covington said she had no intent of voting for Avery Bancroft's proposal, so I wonder what in the world changed her mind. Money. She needed the money. Her own brother took the stand and told you that she said she was the swing vote. Whoever wanted that proposal would owe her bid. So when Avery Bancroft called needing her vote, she decided to take something in return. That's when Avery Bancroft enters this story and the money trail begins. Now, Chase Covington took the stand and said that Mickey Keenan at one point offered a bribe. She said, "No, no way." Members of the jury, if she believed that her assistant was suggesting a bribe, then why didn't she just fire him? She's the chair of the Midlands Gambling Commission. At the time, she believed he was nothing more than an assistant. She didn't fire him because she was on board. She sent him this email saying, "It's time you learned how things really get done in my office." How do things really get done? Well, she told you that in that meeting on April 13th, Avery Bancroft offered her a bribe. Now, members of the jury, there's a reason why this was held in a private hotel suite, not a Starbucks, not a restaurant, not her own office. There was a security guard at the door, patting everyone down, taking people's cell phones. It's because they were discussing a bribe, and she knew. Now, we brought forth this napkin, yes, equals $250,000, to show you a bribe was discussed. The defendant herself told you she took it. She tried to tell you that she crumpled it up and threw it away because she didn't want it a part of the conversation. Then why did her own brother testify that he found it in her coat pocket? She didn't throw it away. She took it. And right before she left that meeting, she picked up her briefcase and said, "I'm going to need a new one of these if you catch my drift." Which brings us to the second point in our money trail, the briefcase. Now, their own witness, Corey Hyde, took the stand and said she saw Avery Bancroft putting at least $200,000 in a briefcase that looked just like this one. Devin Del Sesto said that he saw Avery Bancroft in the VIP room with a briefcase that looked just like this one. And then he is certain that he saw Miss Covington walk out with this briefcase on April 16th. Now, Mr. Zhu, he stood here and asked Mr. Del Sesto just how certain he was that he could tell this was the briefcase. Well, I want you to look to the testimony of their own witness, Mr. Thomas, who said never before that day had anyone come into that VIP room with a briefcase. Not just a briefcase that looked like this one, a briefcase at all. It wasn't just a coincidence. Mr. Del Sesto said he saw Miss Covington leave with Mr. Bancroft's briefcase, and he wasn't lying. He saw this briefcase right here. The same one that their witness saw stuffed with $250,000 just an hour before. Now, Mr. Monetos, he told you that that same day, Miss Covington, she came home with a briefcase, went straight into her office and locked the door. So what happened to it? She took it straight to the bank. Now, Officer Keenan testified about the video footage showing Miss Covington going into her bank and making this deposit of $250,000. Now, what a coincidence that the very same day she votes for Avery Bancroft's proposal. Members of the jury, she voted for Avery Bancroft's proposal because he gave her the money to do so. Now, Miss Covington had the audacity to take the stand and tell you, "I won this money gambling?" And then Mr. Stern stood here and said, "Well, who else knew about it? Did you tell anyone?" She said, "Oh, I told family, I told friends, I told everybody." Well, isn't it strange that Mr. Monetos, her own brother who lived upstairs, didn't hear anything about that? Maybe it's because it didn't happen. We stood up here and asked Ms. Hyde, "Well, did you know anything about a publicity event on April 6th? She said no. Mr. Thomas was asked by Ms. Atlas right here, "Did you include a specific number of how much you thought Ms. Covington won on April 6th? He said, "No, I'm not sure." Well, maybe he's not sure it happened at all. The only person that could testify that there was some kind of publicity event was the person on trial. There was no publicity event. Mr. Monetos told you that the defendant would come home with chips in her pocket. She was angry, she was yelling. That doesn't sound like someone who's very good at poker, blackjack, or whatever else she said she played. It sounds like someone who lost a lot of money. Now I want you to think about the story they tried to tell you out there, because it doesn't really make sense. They tried to tell you that Chase Covington won $250,000 on April 6th. Now, one of the biggest casinos in Midland just failed to give her any kind of documentation for that. But then a week later, she goes and sits in front of Mr. Thomas and says, "I'm really hard on cash." But don't worry, I'm about to meet with Avery Bancroft, so it's all about to work itself out. Members of the jury, if she really won that money on April 6th, and was so hard for cash just 1 week later, that doesn't sound like a very good gambler to me. If you really want to know where that money came from, just follow it from Bancroft to the briefcase to the bank. It'll lead you straight to the defendant. Find her guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Olive. Mr. Stone, you the rest of your...
Yes, Your Honor. Commissioner Procedure. when Mr. Zhu stood up to introduce himself. He asked the judge a question. Said, "Can we make our appearances for the court?" And the judge said, "Yes, Mr. Zhu, thank you, you can." Because the judge wanted to hear what Mr. Zhu had to say. He wanted the truth to come out. Now, there have been a lot of words used today in this trial from the beginning to the end, but of all of them, 3 have stuck with me especially, and they weren't a witness's, they were Miss Oliver's. No, thank you. She's up here asking questions to the defendant, and the defendant's trying to explain statements that she made. She's presented with an email which never uses the word bribe, doesn't say anything about money, doesn't say anything about favors. And so the defendant offers. She says, "Miss Oliver, I can tell you why I wrote that." And Miss Oliver says, "No, thank you." And doesn't that just encapsulate this entire investigation and case? Because sure, there had been corruption in the Gambling Commission in the past, but Ms. Covington was a new commissioner. And when she demonstrated again and again that she was not willing to accept a bribe, the state just kept on saying, "No, thank you." You heard from witnesses here today who said that they never heard the defendant ask for a bribe, that they never saw the defendant take any money, and still the state says, "No, thank you." The state has known for years that this prosecution would come. It started with Mickey Keenan, who received that email, promoting him for the first time from traffic and college drinking cop to undercover investigator. And what Mr. Keenan told you is that for a year and a half, he didn't find what he was looking for. Not until he himself went to the office of Avery Bancroft and asked him to give a bribe that was never accepted. And whether or not the state wants to see that, as a jury, you can't just politely decline to review some of the evidence. This case should never have been brought. It wouldn't have been had they seen the facts that the witnesses told. This case should not have been brought because the defendant's vote was not bought. Now I want to be very clear about one thing. Today, all day, it's been the state that has bore a burden of proof. That means it was their job and their job alone to prove to you so thoroughly, so completely, that you have no reasonable doubts in your mind that this defendant accepted a bribe. When Ms. Covington walked through those courtroom doors, she was presumed to be innocent. When she took the stand today to testify, she was presumed to be innocent. No matter how many times the state says no thank you to her exonerating evidence, she is presumed to be innocent. And she still is unless they've met their burden beyond all reasonable doubt. And they did not do that. Let me ask you, of the 6 witnesses who were called here to testify today, how many of them told you that they saw the defendant take any money? Of the 6 witnesses who came here to testify today, how many of them told you that they ever heard the defendant ask for a bribe? Of the 6 witnesses who came here today to testify, how many of them told you that the defendant ever said yes to an offer for a bribe? Of the 6 witnesses that came here today to testify, how many of them told you that they thought Ms. Covington was a bad gambler? The answer to every single one of those questions is the same as the number of dollars that the defendant ever took from Avery Bancroft, and that is 0. So what did their witnesses prove, ladies and gentlemen? Well, first they called Mr. Menetos to the stand. And Mr. Menetos, sure, he finds a crumpled up napkin in Miss Covington's coat pocket, but we know how it got there. We know that she was handed that napkin, that she rejected that offer, and that she crumpled it up and put it in her coat pocket, where it stayed. I mean, think about it. They want you to believe that because that napkin was found in Miss Covington's coat pocket, that means she was considering accepting the bribe. She forgot about it, ladies and gentlemen. She never even took it out of her coat pocket after it was crumpled up. Wasn't found on her desk, wasn't found in her office. It was found exactly the place where she told you she put it after she rejected the offer. But that's not all that Mr. Menetos had to say. He also said that he knew his sister was a good gambler, said he found poker chips in her pockets, said that she was honest, ethical, and that he'd never seen her do anything unethical before. That's the government's witness, ladies and gentlemen, telling you that. What about their second witness, Officer Mickey Keenan, well, Mickey Keenan sure made it clear to you that he expected there to be some sort of bribe, that he planned for there to be some sort of bribe, that he went to Mr. Bancroft's office and on March 31st asked Mr. Bancroft to offer some sort of bribe. But what he never gave you is any evidence that the defendant accepted or wanted to accept a bribe. Instead, he told you that the only time that he approached Miss Covington about this bribe, Miss Covington was adamant, screaming at him that maybe that was done in the past, but it wouldn't be done now. That she wasn't willing to accept anything off the books. How did Mr. Keenan respond to that? No, thank you. April 13th, at the meeting that they had Mr. Keenan speak about with the napkin, first he left out the part where the napkin was passed to Miss Covington and then she rejected the offer. When she said, I don't think you understand what kind of position this puts me in. By the way, that's entirely consistent with her testimony. That the governor told her that if any applicant persisted, she'd have to report that activity to the police. So doesn't it make sense, ladies and gentlemen, that Mr. Keenan heard her say, I don't think you understand what kind of position this offer puts me in, as she rejected it? And that was the only evidence that we heard today about what happened in that meeting from Mr. Keenan. In fact, Mr. Keenan told you that later on, when a meeting was scheduled with a briefcase full of cash ready for Miss Covington to accept, she simply didn't come. This was a private room, didn't have security cameras, didn't have poker dealers. If you were committing a bribe, accepting one, would you want to do it out in the open? Or would you go to a private meeting that had been set up, ladies and gentlemen? Go to a private meeting. But Miss Covington never showed up at that meeting, and there's a reason for that. It's because she never intended to accept any bribe. And as for their third witness, Mr. Del Sesto, sure, he was a delightful character to have in the courtroom. But he got 20 minutes of sleep the day that he says he is 100% sure that that generic black briefcase was exchanged with another generic black briefcase. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pulling up a briefcase right now. Do you know whether or not it's the one that's been shown to you today? You saw it a few minutes ago. Is it possible that I pulled a different one out? Is this absolutely the same one? Can you be certain? Just looks like a briefcase, ladies and gentlemen. Their eyewitness never saw an exchange of briefcases. And then we called witnesses who specifically did not see that exchange. We called a witness, Allie Thomas, to the stand, who says despite the fact that Mr. Bancroft brought a briefcase to the meeting on the casino floor on April 16th, that briefcase was never given to Miss Covington. And that's consistent entirely with the defendant's testimony. By the way, Mr. Thomas also said that he saw the defendant win all that money that was deposited on April 6th. And as for all these documents that they've given you, a financial disclosure form, a bank statement, they say follow the money, but ladies and gentlemen, it's an example of the prosecution picking and choosing which facts they want you to see. They want you to see the liabilities on the financial disclosure form and say, oh, these are absolutely true. She didn't lie about those. But up here where she reports the gambling winnings, she's lying about that. Look at the $250,000 deposit on the bank statement, but don't look at the $100,000 withdrawal or the $50,000 withdrawal. Follow the money, but only some of it. Follow the briefcase, but don't see the exchange. Ladies and gentlemen, they don't have evidence beyond all reasonable doubt. Maybe that briefcase was filled with cash when Avery Bancroft brought it to the casino floor. But that case shouldn't have been brought because her vote was not bought. And so we're confident she'll leave this courtroom as innocent as she came into it. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Ms. Oliver.
Yes, Your Honor, may I inquire as to how much time I have left?
You have 50 seconds.
Thanks. May I proceed?
You may.
On April 19th, the defendant waived her Miranda rights and said, I have nothing to hide. So the police said, hey, what is up with your briefcase? Can you explain that? Do you want us to explain to us why you have that? What does the defendant say? No, thank you. We're done here. See, the explanation she wanted to give you on trial today when she's being charged with bribery is different than the explanation she wanted to give the police when she knew what they were asking. But they want you to believe it's all a coincidence. It's just a coincidence that the same amount on that napkin is what's deposited in her bank. It's just a coincidence that Avery Bancroft offered a bribe at all. It's just a coincidence that no one else has heard about this publicity event. Members of the jury, coincidence after coincidence is no coincidence at all. In this case, it's criminal.
Time.
Find her guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Constance. We'll wait just a minute for the scores to complete their blues and we'll get those out quickly since we're approaching calls.
We're actually filing on a law if,
Are we?
just because it
Oh, that's
qualifies
true.
at the end of the closing argument, so they can take their time for that.
And, I mean, if we're cutting that little space, that's.
Yeah.
Ah, gotcha. Careful.